Here's Craig Breslow talking to the media.
And somebody who can step into our rotation and add to our pitching group.
Craig, I know you had talked about wanting to add a front of the rotation starter, maybe someone to slide behind Crochet. How do you feel May fits that role, or if he maybe profiles sort of towards the back of the rotation, and just how you see the rotation in general kind of going forward?
Yeah, well, I think where our rotation has gone, we've followed, and when we've gotten really good starting pitching, we've won a bunch of games. We've been competitive. I think Dustin fits into that group. I don't know how much sense it makes to say exactly what he is ultimately. What he does over the next 2 months and beyond is going to define his time here in Boston. We pursued a number of really impact opportunities. Obviously, not all of them work out, but it wasn't from a lack of trying to be as aggressive as possible, from an unwillingness to get uncomfortable. But ultimately, it takes two teams lining up for those trades to line up.
Craig, did you ultimately feel the price for front of the rotation starters was too high?
No, I don't think this is about an unwillingness to include guys or anything like that. Teams have to like our players in order for that to happen. And, we went into this deadline feeling like, in order to accomplish what we needed to accomplish, what we hoped to accomplish, we couldn't take some of our young minor league players off the table. We couldn't go into this with untouchables, and we didn't. We were willing to talk about all of our guys in the name of improving the team. It just didn't work out.
Craig, how would you describe just kind of your emotional takeaway from this deadline? Are you disappointed you didn't get more done? Are you pleased with what you did? Just how would you square that?
Yeah, I think all of those emotions can be true at the same time, in that, we're happy with the guys that we brought in with Steven and Dustin. But we also pursued real impact players that we felt like could improve our team in 25 and beyond. Like I said, we were kind of uncomfortably aggressive in trying to pursue them, and the players that we were willing to put into deals. And ultimately, it wasn't from a lack of effort. Other teams needed to say, hey, that's enough, or that crosses the line. But like I said, it wasn't about, an unwillingness to talk about our full system. And I think in a lot of ways, some of the deals that we've made, talking about the Crochet deal as an example, and a willingness to give up some of our best young players to improve our major league team, that was instructive in terms of how we approached this deadline. But, ultimately, we didn't line up with other teams in those pursuits.
Craig, in terms of thinking about moves that would have involved the major league team, how much did that change over the month of July? We were talking with you a few weeks ago about the potential for outfield surplus. How much did Meyer's injury reconfigure that potential avenue? And can you give us an update on Marcelo? Yeah,
I think Marcelo is still trying to get as much information as possible. I'll have a second opinion and then determine kind of what the right course is here. So we're still collecting information on that front. But then in terms of, potentially dealing from a surplus with our major league team, I think over the last 2 to 3 weeks, it became clear that all 26 guys on our roster were contributing to what we were doing. And, we weren't willing to take a hit to our major league team and potentially impact the 2025 season, in favor of trying to repackage or repurpose in a way that might have improved the future. And there weren't really opportunities to both trade off of our major league team and improve our 2025 outlook. So we felt like it was best to kind of leave that group as it was and, try to use what I think is a strong and deep system to try to improve the team. And I think, with Dustin and Steven, we did that. But in some other pursuits, like I said, it wasn't from an unwillingness to talk about anybody in our system.
Craig, there was a report from late Wednesday night that you were engaged on, maybe the best bat that changed hands during the last couple of days, realizing that most of your focus was on pitching. How much of your time was spent on looking for a bat and one that could maybe help you at first base?
Yeah, we spent pretty significant time trying to add a bat, but someone again that could, impact the roster and represent a meaningful upgrade over the guys that we have either on our team or potentially in AAA that we feel like would immediately improve the roster. We weren't able to line up, but again, like none of the none of the deals that didn't end up being executed, in my opinion, came from a lack of being aggressive or an unwillingness to get uncomfortable. But it does take two teams to line up in order for trades to go across the line.
Greg, what can you tell us about Steven Matz, and what role do you see him fitting in the bullpen or in the pitching staff in general?
Yeah, so he's obviously been he served multiple roles in the big leagues, but it seems like out of the pen the stuff is ticked up. He's got a really good fastball that plays to both sides. He's a great strike thrower who's been in kind of pressure situations before. So we feel like he's someone that Alex can call upon in the 7th, 8th, 9th inning and get really big outs for us. And if you kind of look at what he's done out of the pen, he's been really, really good.
Craig, considering his history starting, if need be, could you try to stretch him out at some point?
I think I don't want to close the door on anything. That would have to be a conversation. But my hope is that with the current rotation and also some of the younger guys who have recently gotten to AAA, who are likely to get to AAA here pretty soon, that we'll also be able to draw from some of our internal depth. But we're obviously going to do whatever we need to do to try to win games down the stretch here. And, if that means getting him stretched out a little bit or taking on a little bit more of a bulk role, then we'll explore it.
Hey, Craig, as far as not having untouchables and needing other teams to like your players to make a deal, did it surprise you that what you had, players you presumably like, weren't enough or weren't appealing enough to the teams you were talking to?
I don't know if that is, I don't know if that is surprising. I think a lot of the industry does appreciate the young players that we have in our system. And, we tried to work through different combinations of guys. And like I said, didn't approach some of these conversations as though any players were off limits, and we couldn't line up. And we were pursuing, multiple impact players. And obviously on the other side, teams that were operating as sellers were trying to juggle different concepts. And, for whatever reason, we weren't able to line up. But, I do think that there's pretty widespread sentiment across the industry that we have a really solid group of young players, many of whom are already impacting our big league club. And so, I think the outlook is really good, not just for 2025, but beyond.
And despite your status or your position as buyers, did you have teams calling you about, say, Chapman with what the reliever rental market was doing?
No, I think there are teams that are doing their due diligence and checking in. Obviously we recognize what trading somebody like Chappie would mean. And so didn't have the appetite to go down that path. But yeah, I think everybody kind of makes these calls to figure out what might gain traction and what wouldn't. But we're a much better team when AC can call down to the bullpen and get Chapman up for the 9th inning with a lead.
Craig, maybe I have this wrong, and hopefully you can help me just understand, but you mentioned how it takes two to tango and some of the other teams weren't really interested in some of your guys and how you went off to try to make an impact move, get an impact player. But earlier in the season, you traded Rafael Devers for what you called developmental opportunities. And I'm just wondering if there's any regret associated with trading Devers at that time and maybe not trying to get an impact player back for a player like that, who a lot of other teams would have been interested in. Well,
I think what we have to evaluate is how we've played. And I think there are some different considerations to that trade. Again, Rafi is a very, very good hitter and a very talented player. It brought up it created some flexibility in our roster, created a little bit more versatility in terms of playing time and position. I think ultimately we've played very well and won a bunch of games since that time. I think that's how I would characterize kind of the aftermath of the trade. But I think the broader point here is, I understand and we understand as a front office and as an organization how precious and valuable winning seasons are. And so we were doing everything we could over the last 2 weeks to try and bolster the team. But a team has to say yes to our offer, or give us, some type of counter that we can work with in order to execute a trade.
Craig, what do you guys like about May specifically, and could he start for you as soon as tomorrow with the TBD spot?
I think we're still working through when the right time is to get him into the rotation, just given a bit of a whirlwind day, I'm sure, for him. And sometimes, having to get somebody to travel and settle in and then take the ball in a start could be a hefty ask, but we'll work through that. I think ultimately what we see in Dustin is, a guy who really limits hard contact, keeps the ball on the ground at a strong rate. Feel like that's something that will play well here at our park. Is battle tested, has premium stuff, and a bona fide starter that can take the ball for us every 5 days.
Greg, none of this happens in a vacuum this time of year. When you look around at the wild card picture and the rest of the American League, the Yankees, Seattle, Texas, Detroit, others improved. You might look at it on paper and say they improved more than you did today. How much does that concern you, since this is all kind of all in one pool, at least some of those teams fighting for that same spot that you are?
Yeah. We can't ignore what other teams are doing. At the same time, our focus today was identifying and pursuing the players that we felt like were good fits for our team. And ultimately, we're all going to be defined by what happens from tomorrow through, our last game of the season and potentially the playoffs. And so, I think it's really easy to sit here today and evaluate the trades that were made and how much better we think teams got on paper. Ultimately, those questions are going to be answered for us. Like I said, we were as aggressive as we could possibly be in pursuits. Some of them worked out and some of them didn't. And that's the nature of a trade deadline.
Craig, May is already pretty much well over his career high in innings. How do you look at that going down the stretch and how that affects, how he might be used?
Yeah, he feels good. The stuff has continued to trend in the right direction. So, we'll do everything we can to, provide the recovery and resources and monitor workloads the same way we would anybody else, but don't feel like there are kind of restrictions on usage here.
Do you see, Mr. Breslow, do you see Steven Matz taking the role, the spot of Bernardino or Murphy? And what do you saw about tips in during his time in the Red Sox organization?
Sorry, with Matt's time in this.
What do you saw in the tips times in the organization, and what spot do you think that Steven Matz will get once he is on the team?
Gotcha. Yeah. In terms of the spot that he'll take, obviously that will be a conversation that we'll work through. But, in terms of what we think he brings, like I said, the stuff has been really good out of the bullpen. He's been an elite strike thrower, and, the stability of bringing someone in late in games and leverage situations that, is going to compete in the zone is really, really, encouraging and inspires confidence. We really like the way that the stuff is played versus right and versus left, particularly the fastball, and feel like he's capable of getting high leverage outs for us down the stretch.
Craig, recognizing that fans are obviously not seeing behind the scenes and everything, you guys made fewer moves this week than you did at last year's trade deadline. Obviously, the efficacy of those moves will play out in the coming weeks. But what would you say to fans who are frustrated thinking that the team is in a really good position and they just watched other teams make huge trades and maybe you guys didn't get some of those players that you were in on?
Yeah, I understand the frustration and the disappointment because we're all looking at the last week right now in terms of the trades that were made and weren't made, and there's not a lot of sympathy for how hard we tried to get deals across the line. I understand that. We believe that we have a really young, exciting, talented team, and one that is capable of continuing to perform at this level and make it to the postseason. That's what our focus is on. And this, the decisions that were made at this deadline, they weren't driven by, like I said, an unwillingness to be aggressive. They weren't driven by taking, a highlighted or reinforced view of 2026 or 2027. We were aggressively pursuing acquisitions that could help us in 2025, and they didn't line up. But I think if fans were in the office during this deadline, they would see that guys that we maybe didn't expect to be willing to talk about going into these conversations, we made available, and we tried to put the most aggressive offers that we could in hopes that they were gonna end in deals. And sometimes they did, and sometimes they don't.
Any other questions?
A little bit about the three guys you did give up, and Blaze and Tibbs and Earhart. Yeah,
so obviously position players, and Tibbs came back in the Devers deal, and Earhart and Blaze, both guys who were drafted and developed here, and three good players. We obviously didn't get to know James Tibbs as well as, Blaze and Zach, but feel like they are really good baseball players. They're going to go on to have successful careers. Each does something that we like, whether it's James's contact, and Zach has started to hit the ball pretty hard, really good defender in the outfield, and Blaze obviously has been performing really, really well in AAA this year. But you have to be willing to give up good players in order to execute deals. We obviously have found that out, and we're willing to do so. But felt like the additions of Matz and May were worthwhile, just given the position of our major league team right now.
Craig, you mentioned Marcelo was going to get a second opinion. Does that suggest the first one wasn't good, or can you give us some insight as where he's at? If he's going to be able to play again this year?
I think we're still trying to figure all of that out, and I think it's been it's pretty common practice at this point, just to get multiple opinions, make sure that there's alignment, in terms of what is happening, what the best course is. So we'll get that information, and we'll figure out kind of what the path is from there.
And similarly, do you have more on Tanner after his appointments this week?
I think he is trying to weigh all of the information, figure out, again, kind of what the right course is. Obviously I've not had a chance to talk to him over the last 2 days. But will tomorrow, and we'll kind of figure out, at that point, what the course of action is here, and we'll make that available to you guys as appropriate.
I know that you said that you had pursued bats, but in the same vein that about whether the injury to Marcelo changed how you would have explored the possibility of trading from the big league roster. Did it change the aggressiveness with which you were pursuing infield help?
I think probably to some extent it did, in that we were engaged in more conversations with more teams. I think there were a few different ways, or a few more ways the pieces could come together, just given Cedon moving into the infield. now that Alex is back in kind of a full go, he can anchor third base. So I think it probably gave us more flexibility in that, hey, if we got, a bat that played, a particular position, there is enough versatility in pieces that could move around. We've seen that from Zidane. We've seen it from Romy, from, Toro at both corners. And again, ultimately, I think we were willing to be very aggressive. And we didn't line up with other teams when it came to adding a bat.
And you mentioned May obviously would be a whirlwind for him to start tomorrow. Have you guys landed on a TBA guy for tomorrow?
Still working through that. Wanted to see how today shook out, and then I'll circle up with AC, and we'll make an announcement on that.
These are long days, right? Like obviously the build up to the what is the general feeling at the end of a trade deadline day?
Yeah, I think you're wired for a few days, and then you kind of come down from it. There's, I'm sure, fatigue setting in around the office. I think people are tired. They haven't slept much. They've been away from families. So my hope would be tonight everybody has a chance to catch their breath, and then we start to see a very important series tomorrow here at home. So, there isn't a ton of time to dwell on what happened, kind of leading up to today.